As the United States prepared to withdraw its last remaining troops from Iraq, the Washington Post and ABC News conducted a survey. The findings came out in November of 2011, and it showed that 62% of Americans polled felt the war wasn't worth its cost. Only 33% said the objectives achieved were worth it. And a poll conducted in Iraq during the same time period found that 42% of Iraqis felt they were worse off than before the American forces entered their country, compared to the 30% who thought their lives had improved. So a decade later, we're asking, was the war in Iraq worth it? Joining me now with their own opinions, Michael Hoffman, founder of Iraq Veterans Against the War, who is joining us from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and John Rentoul, chief political commentator for The Independent on Sunday in London. Michael and John, welcome to The Heat. Michael, you were there, you fought in the war, was it worth it?
I would have to say absolutely not. When you look at the lives lost here from Americans, British troops, other coalition partners, and most importantly, the lives lost of the people in Iraq and what we did to that country, it was absolutely not worth it.
John, let me ask you, I've heard you say that you felt that Tony Blair went into this with a noble purpose. It was a moral foreign policy. You still feel the same way?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think whether it was worth it is a very hard question to ask. And obviously, I don't think it was worth 800 billion American dollars. And, you know, it's very difficult for an outsider to say that the lives lost in Iraq were in any sense worth it. I mean, far too many people died. But I think for the Iraqis themselves, even at the height of the sectarian disorder in 2006, there was a very clear majority of the Iraqi population. They thought it was worth it to get rid of all their hardship was worth it to get rid of Saddam Hussein. And that, I think, is the one optimistic thing that comes out of it.
Well, let me frame the question differently then. Was it justified?
Oh, it was clearly justified, in my view, because Saddam Hussein was in defiance of United Nations resolutions for 12 years, and it was not worth the risk of leaving such a dangerous tyrant in power. And you know, when the Americans decided to go in, I think the British took an entirely justified decision to join them.
Michael, I saw you shaking your head in the negative. Give me your thoughts.
Well, we talk about the cause of the war and the morality of it. Here in the U.S., and I can't speak directly to what they were being told in Britain, but the reason for the war kept changing. At first, we were told weapons of mass destruction. When there was no sign of weapons of mass destruction, it then became, well, Saddam had links to terrorism and there were terrorists in Iraq. The only reason there were terrorists in Iraq is because of the presence of U.S. and international troops. And also, you look at what was happening there. There was Ahmed Chalabi, who was the source of most of the American intelligence that led to the war. All that intelligence was shown to be fabricated. And that was the basis for the entire war. That was the basis for Britain joining us as well. So to say it was that we had to do that, it was morally justified, I think is absolutely false.
Well, John, he's talking about, he doesn't know exactly what's being told to you over on the other side of the pond. One thing that is coming out that wasn't done here in the United States, there's been an inquiry, the Chilcot inquiry into the Iraq war. It's set to come out with its final report a little bit later this year. It is expected to challenge the official version of events. How much of a bombshell is
expected by whom?
Well, that's what I'm reading. You tell me. You're there in London. It seems to be that's what the press reports
well, I'm afraid
are saying.
You're reading my own. You're reading my own newspaper, The Independent, which reported that it's expected to challenge the official version. And I think the Chilcot inquiry will come to a sane and balanced conclusion, which is that the invasion was entirely justified. It wasn't handled very well afterwards, and the occupation was frankly a disaster.
Well, let's talk about that then, the occupation being a disaster, which I think both of you will agree on. Is the Middle East a safer place now as a result of what happened in Iraq? And why don't I start again with you, Michael?
Well, looking at Iraq and generalizing to the Middle East, I think is false, because Iraq is a very different place compared to the rest of the Middle East. But I think getting back to what we were talking about with the reconstruction and what going on after the initial invasion, we need to look at that to say, was the war justified? What would happen after the initial invasion showed that there was absolutely no plan, no understanding of Iraq, no real understanding of its people, no want to help the people of Iraq. And that shows to me that the war was not justified. We were not in it to help the people of Iraq. A few people in power in the United States, and they drug along some of their international coalition partners, decided they wanted a war with Iraq no matter what the cost. That was the reason for the war in Iraq. If they had really done it for the people of Iraq to help their standard of living, to help them form a real democracy, there would have been an actual real plan to reconstruct their country, which there was not. And the recent plan that came out from the special inspector that was created to identify these problems in the U.S. has bore that out.
John, I saw you had a bit of a quizzical expression on your face. I want to give you a chance to respond.
Well, I don't know what was the reason why George Bush wanted a war? I mean, just for the sake of a war? Is he just bloodthirsty or something?
I'm not saying he in particular is bloodthirsty, but there were multiple reasons for the war. First of all, natural resources and oil. There was a definite interest in Iraqi oil. Also, if you look what's going on with Cheney and Rumsfeld, they wanted a theater to show off their new style of war fighting, this new electronic warfare that they were talking about. We're now seeing it increasingly with drones, their new mobilized combat teams, things like that. They needed a battlefield, a theater to try that out, and Iraq was the theater they chose.
John?
I don't believe that. I don't believe that for 1 second. And if the Bush administration went into Iraq for oil, it was a hell of an expensive way to do it. I mean, to spend $800 billion of U.S. taxpayers' money just so that Chinese companies could pump some oil out of Iraq sounds like a very, very bad deal to me. And people who think that was the real reason why the Americans went to war, I'm afraid are deluding themselves. George Bush thought that after 9/11 he could not take any risks with American national security, and he was determined to deal with threats which the Americans had frankly become quite complacent about around the world, and Saddam Hussein was one of the prime ones of those. And you asked, is the Middle East safer? I think the entire region is safer, partly as a result of the invasion of Iraq. We saw that Libya. Colonel Gaddafi in Libya gave up his ambitions to develop weapons of mass destruction after Iraq, and then we saw the Arab Spring, which was partly, I suspect, a response to the invasion of Iraq, and I think that's might eventually make that whole region safer and more democratic.
Do you think, though, that Western intervention in these hotspots now has been diminished, found to be less appealing because of what happened in Iraq? I'll start with you, John.
Well, I think we've learned a lot of lessons in Iraq, certainly. But I think what's remarkable is the willingness of Western public opinion to continue to intervene in places like Libya. In Libya, we, obviously, is a much more limited intervention, learning some of the lessons from Iraq, but we are still prepared to intervene militarily when humanitarian reasons justify it, and when national security of Western countries justifies it. And I think Syria is another very, very good example to us all of the costs of not intervening. I'm not saying it will be easy to intervene in Syria, but it is a very vivid demonstration that if you don't intervene in places like Iraq, people will also die.
Michael, I'm going to give you the final word on this.
Well, I just want to go back to what was being discussed about America seeking out those who presented a threat to us. At the time of the invasion of Iraq, Iraq posed no threat to the United States security. There was a nation that posed a real threat, Afghanistan, because of its connections to the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, which we basically ignored once we invaded Iraq and let fall apart even more than it already was after our initial invasion in 2001. We should have been concentrating resources, both military and humanitarian, in Afghanistan. Instead, we got involved in a pointless war in Iraq that detracted resources from Afghanistan and created the horrible mess.
Michael Hoffman, John Rentoul, thank you both for joining us today. Certainly appreciate it.